don't account for us specifically. So I figured it made more sense to kind of get a sense of how this works.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we'll definitely tackle that topic in this webinar. We've got an action-packed agenda today, so let's start. I'm sure lots of people will be dropping into the call over the next couple minutes. So firstly, just wanted to welcome everybody. Thank you all for taking the time to join this webinar. Today, Guy and I are really excited to explore this month's webinar topic, which is all about the connection between the circular economy and Scope 3 emissions, and why circularity is the perfect tool to reduce Scope 3 emissions. So before we dive in, a quick introduction to Guy and myself. I'll go first. I'm Charlie. I'm the Sustainability Manager here at Root. Before Root, I worked as a sustainability consultant for over 4 years, and I've also worked in-house at Amazon. I've supported over 80 companies on their sustainability journeys by helping businesses create and implement strategies, certify as B Corps, and use life cycle assessments to create impact in their companies. So now I'm just going to pass over to you, Guy, for a quick intro.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Guy, program lead at Amsterdam Circular. We are a circular chain accelerator program initiated by the City of Amsterdam with the AMS Institute, the research institute where we are now, with various government partners like the Dutch investment agency called InvestNL, and private sector partners who are building the legal, financial, and administrative infrastructure for circular value chain collaborations. And we're basically trying to figure out how do we help companies work with their supply chain partners to become them more circular. And in order to do that, I need to be accountable for what you're doing and using tools such as life cycle assessments and traceability solutions to measure that and put that data to use.
Brilliant. Thanks for that intro, Guy. So I'm just going to share my screen. Just checking. Can everybody see my screen now? Is it all good?
It's good.
Great. So what are we going to be covering today? So in this webinar, we'll be covering a quick introduction to who Root is. Then Guy and I are going to have an informal conversation, really tackling the topic of this webinar's, the key focus of this webinar. So what is the circular economy? Why is Scope 3 emissions such a big deal? And how can circularity be used to reduce Scope 3 emissions? And then that will leave lots of time for Q&A at the end with you guys, the audience. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat or write them down and ask in the Q&A at the end. So firstly, a quick introduction to who Root is. Root is a life cycle assessment software solution that automates environmental impact management for companies with large product portfolios. You might be wondering, why are companies interested in working with Root? It's because sustainability teams with large product portfolios urgently need access to scalable company and product footprints. This is due to a number of reasons, including compliance with regulations like the Green Claims Directive and CSRD is not optional. Companies need to report effectively on these frameworks to avoid greenwashing, significant fines, and reputational damage. Also, companies need company and product footprints to meet transparency demands from stakeholders like investors and retailers. So having company and product level data is now essential for retaining customers and building trust with key stakeholders. Lastly, having accurate company and product level footprints empowers companies to effectively create impact in their business, like driving product innovation and accelerating net zero journeys. So, sustainability teams with large product portfolios urgently need access to scalable LCAs to create these company and product level footprints, as they are increasingly being asked to achieve more with leaner teams. However, they're having a lot of challenges. Mainly, firstly, they're being overloaded by corporate and product level compliance requirements. they are also being burdened by scattered data across enterprise systems. And they are using manual processes which require a lot of time and resources. This is why we created Root. Our platform offers a software solution that is user-friendly. We offer one centralized platform for all your disclosure needs. Our platform is scalable, so our platform seamlessly integrates with your existing systems. This creates scalable LCAs across entire product portfolios. And lastly, we're efficient. Our automation and our guidance helps you save time and money. So how does Root work? Root is the first company to bridge company-wide and product-level footprints into a single environmental impact platform. Our normalized data structure allows for integration with various enterprise systems, creating scalable LCAs across entire supply chains and product portfolios. Lastly, our holistic methodology and ISO-compliant LCAs perform continuous screenings, enabling companies to drill down on the 10% driving 90% of their impact. Without company and product level footprints, companies are making important decisions blind. Root's LCAs empowers companies to focus their efforts on where it matters most. And lastly, what are the key benefits of working with Root? Firstly, our platform is user-friendly. Skip the complex technical LCA process. Just upload your data and we'll provide full LCA insights for all of your products. Our easy-to-use, intuitive platform requires no prior LCA experience. Secondly, Root facilitates supplier engagement. The majority of your impact, like your carbon emissions, are in your value chain, so bringing your suppliers along on your sustainability journey is essential. Our normalized data models support smooth data sharing across companies, creating referral networks across supply chains. And lastly, Root empowers decision-making. So don't waste time guessing where to focus your efforts. Screen your business, find the 10% driving 90% of your impact, and fully focus on that. Our LCAs create cost-effective, high-impact sustainability strategies. Ultimately, what Root does is convert complex technical LCA information into easy-to-understand data and insights companies can use to comply with regulations and drive impact in their business. So if you're interested to learn more about Root and see our platform, feel free to book in a demo with Root's co-founder, Gijs. You can schedule a demo by going onto our website. So that was just an introduction to who Root is. Now Guy and I will have an informal conversation, really focusing on what the circular economy is, why Scope 3 emissions is such a big deal, and how circularity can be used to reduce Scope 3 emissions. So Guy, let's start with what is the circular economy and why is circularity so important to combating climate change?
Yes, thank you, Charlie. Root sustainability is the circular economy. I was so proud to work with Gijs. Visionaries like himself fill me with inspiration that the circular economy is going to happen with people like him pushing it forwards. For me, the circular economy is an economic model based on nature. There's no waste, there's no pollution, there's no toxicity. On a very practical level, I see circularity as the business case for sustainability. It's about making supply chains more efficient, leaner, more flexible, more adaptable, more resilient, more cost-effective, while designing out the bad stuff and having supply chains eventually have a regenerative effect on the biosphere. For me, our work is very much focused on the chain level. Like, we do work with companies and their chain partners. I think the main lesson that we've learned so far in the journey of Amsterdam Circular is that no company can become circular on their own. They have to engage their suppliers upstream. They have to engage customers downstream, distributors. And by reimagining the chain in a way, using data, we can make them more cost effective and regenerative. So that's what gets me up in the morning.
And it'd be great, Guy, if you could just expand a little bit more about the connection between circular economy and climate change, and how the intersections between the two sustainability topics.
Yeah, certainly. So something that got me really excited is, well, it's the topic of Scope 3 emissions. It's exactly what we're here and we're talking about. I was reading Circular Supply Chain by Deborah Dull, and the number that really jumped out at me is that up to 90% of a company's emissions are Scope 3. They're connected to their supply chain partners, and it's not something that they can control. Like, you as a company owner or working in a company, you can't directly control your Scope 3 emissions. But if you're collaborating with your supply chain partners, and to make it more resilient, cost effective, it's also a chance to tackle those Scope 3 emissions. It's really this huge lever that we can pull on to have the biggest impact on your CO2 emissions, I believe, is by focusing on those Scope 3s. Yeah, that's just what we have to do. That's the work that lies ahead, is redesigning our chains in ways that are low carbon, but we have to collaborate in order to make that happen.
Really exciting stuff to learn more about circularity and how it's such a big opportunity for climate change mitigation and resilience. Just to kind of, because circularity is such a theory, it's a theory and it's very theoretical. So just making this more tangible, Guy, do you have any examples of well-known companies which are implementing ambitious circular economy initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, circularity is as practical as it gets. We're literally working on the topic with companies who are reimagining their products, redesigning their supply chains, moving their chain partners towards signed chain agreements, accessing chain financing to do the work that needs to be done. And all of that is powered by data, which often comes through life cycle assessments. So yes, circular has definitely moved out of theory into action. But in terms of some examples, I think one of the poster children for circular is Patagonia, the popular textiles fashion company. They've just been making incredible, they're doing incredible innovation on materials that are lower carbon, less waste, less toxicity. They're really creative at how they communicate the benefits of this. I think that was made most popular by their "Do not buy this jacket" ad that they took out in the New York Times. It featured their best-selling jacket, but the idea was to get their customers to think twice about their consumer behaviors. Like, mindless consumption is the enemy of the circular economy. What we need to have is jackets that are designed to be repaired again and again and again. And that's something that Patagonia does so well, is making it really easy for their customers to connect with repair companies and just keep their jacket lasting for a long time. On quite a practical level, one of the companies in Amsterdam Circular is working with Patagonia, and they truly do practice what they preach. Patagonia's European headquarters is in Amsterdam. They have a big office, a lot of people to feed. Catering can often have a huge amount of food waste, and the carbon in that is one of the biggest that there is. But they're working with Alex in Wonderland. They're the catering provider for Patagonia, and designing waste completely out of the catering chain with Patagonia. So obviously, when there's any bits and pieces left over from the cooking part, you can make pestos, you can make chutneys, you can make vinegars. And this is something that Patagonia has been working with Alex in Wonderland in, and supporting them to design waste entirely out of the catering chain, even beyond the walls of Patagonia and out into the world. So I think Patagonia is a really great example on a big level. And then Alex in Wonderland is a great example of the small to medium enterprise, the entrepreneurs who are also working to design waste out of their chain because it makes business sense. There's less waste, there's higher retained value, and quite often you end up with new products and new revenue streams coming out when you start to think in a circular way.
Great to hear, and also brilliant to hear that Patagonia practices what it preaches, because I'm a massive fanboy of Patagonia. I love them. So now just moving us on to kind of Scope 3 emissions. So Guy, it'd be great if you could just provide an overview of what Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are, and explain why Scope 3 is such a big deal.
Yeah, totally. This is a pretty advanced audience that you have here. I think many of you are working with Root. But look, Scope 1 is direct. It's stuff that you can control yourself as a company. Scope 2 are indirect. These are often coming through the purchases that you make. Think of energy. Yeah, like you can't exactly control that, but you can make a choice around your what you buy. And then Scope 3 are the tricky ones, the indirect ones that you can't easily control. And those are baked into your supply chain. Think of logistics, transportation, waste along the logistics chain as well. That's not easy to tackle. But that's where the majority, like let's say up 90%, I've even heard 99.8% of a company's emissions are Scope 3. So it's really huge. Like this, if we want to make an impact on our carbon footprint, we really have to be talking about Scope 3 emissions. We have to do what we can on Scope 1. We have to choose consciously with what we procure with Scope 2, but we have to collaborate with our supply chain partners to pull down on that lever and really tackle the big chunk of Scope 3 emissions. But it's hard. You can't control it. You have to collaborate, and your collaborators have to change their way of working, and that is hard. That's a hard thing to do. However, the good news is you can make your supply chain more efficient, more resilient, more adaptable. There are a lot of shifts in both the regulatory landscape, but also the geopolitical landscape is forcing companies to rapidly reshuffle their supply chains. And so doing it in a way that's low carbon it just makes business sense, but as a benefit, we can tackle Scope 3 emissions at the same time.
Yeah, I completely agree. Scope 3 is definitely the kind of the nut that we need to crack in sustainability. I saw a pretty shocking stat that 98% of Apple's carbon footprint is Scope 3, which really just shows how important it is that we need to be tackling Scope 3 when we're talking about climate change mitigation and net zero and climate change. So, Guy, now that we understand what circularity and what Scope 3 emissions are, this is the big question of the webinar. Why do you think the circular economy is the perfect tool to reduce Scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, so in a practical way, circular is the business case. It makes sense. Over the short term, you can increase your margins, and over the long term, you're well positioned when compliance and regulatory issues are going to come after you. So it's really about future-proofing your business. Yeah, I mean, I think if we start with the absolute fundamentals, Ellen MacArthur basically gave us 3 principles that we can all work with that I think are quite easy to understand. Principle 1 is designing waste out of your products and your supply chain. That includes toxicity. It's quite clear. The second pillar is keeping materials circulating at the highest value possible. This just means rather than throwing away your product when you're done with it, how do we refurbish, repair, remanufacture it so that it stays in the loop and it keeps adding value and it keeps going back in again and again and again? This is how we're going to create wealth. It's absolutely insane that we're throwing so much value into the dump and burning it. Like our ancestors will look at us and be like, what were you doing? But yeah, we're working on it. And then the third pillar, if we do our job well, designing out waste and keeping materials circulating at their highest value, then we get to the good stuff, which is regenerating nature. And eventually, our supply chains will have a regenerative effect on water systems, on oxygen, on the soil, on carbon capture. Like, this is the frontier that everyone in Circular is really excited about. And I think for most of us who are in the sustainability space, like, we got our work to do, get the business to grow. But if we do our job really, really well, then we get to build and sell products that are regenerative by nature. That's the goal that we share in the circular economy.
Very interesting. And I love how you're using the word regenerative. I thought that's in my sustainability career, that's really started to come up as more, that's the goal, rather than reducing impacts. Like, let's actually create really positive impact business, regenerative businesses. Yeah. Could you, Guy, could you give any kind of, does any examples come to mind of any companies that you know which are really implementing ambitious circularity initiatives to reduce their Scope 3 emissions?
Yes. So it all comes down to data, right? So that's where I will focus. In our first edition of Amsterdam Circular, we had this really bright team of founders from the Technical University of Delft come into the program called Biosphere Solar. And I think most people know that the solar photovoltaics industry is a huge amount of waste. The shelf life of a lot of solar panels is like less than 10 years, sometimes like a lot less. And when they reach end of life, quite often they're ground up and added to concrete, which just seems insane that we're losing all of those valuable critical materials in photovoltaics. So they set out to create solar panels that are fully circular, can be repaired, can be refurbished, can be remanufactured. They design toxicity right out from the very beginning, and to like extend the shelf life of those solar panels as much as possible. In collaboration, Biosphere Solar with AMS Institute and Circularize, who's a digital product passport provider, they let us trace materials through a supply chain, and some other research partners. We set out to tackle Scope 3 emissions in the photovoltaics industry. We set up a research consortia called FairPV to basically test them, install them. They're set up right in front of me on what we call the Biobase Pavilion in the Marina Terrain in central Amsterdam. And we're using these digital product passports to gather as much data as possible. And then our researchers are using that to help them guide their journey on scaling up circular solar panels. Ideally, one day we will have them in these solar farms that are basically the size of Belgium, popping up in Australia, parts of Africa, and hopefully other places in the world as well. It'll be a huge deal once we have data on sectors like photovoltaics, so that they can also put that data to use, redesigning their products, reimagining their supply chain to tackle these Scope 3 emissions based on the data. It's very early, so we don't have a lot of data to disclose just yet, but we're gathering the data and we're going to be putting that to use.
Sounds like a super interesting company. Really looking forward to seeing how that progresses. I feel like the potential for that company is insane. Like you said, if some solar farms are the size of Belgium, huge opportunity for impact. Just on the topic of data, so it's really clear now that circularity is such a strong lever to reduce scope emissions. It'd be interesting to kind of explore now the role and where life cycle assessment plays into this puzzle. So it'd be great, Guy, if you could just, what's your thoughts on how can automated life cycle assessment platforms help companies implement circularity initiatives to reduce their Scope 3 emissions?
You can't manage what you don't measure. So having automated life cycle assessments, it gives you the data that you need to manage not just the compliance, but also to make your products more successful in the market. And really that measurement part, it's science, but it's also going to become an art form as time goes by. Like, how do we put this data to use to reimagine these huge industrial supply chains? With that data that you can gather from the LCAs, it just gives you insights. How can you design your products for recycling? How do you design your products to extend their product life? How do you close the loop entirely so that there is no material waste? And ideally, with bio-based materials, your products have a regenerative effect in biological systems at their end of life. That's going to be huge. Maybe the word that I hear the most is accountability. The LCAs let you stay compliant, and this is no joke. I think everyone here in the audience has some role to play in compliance, and luckily Root is making it as easy as possible to just upload your data and get the insights that you need to start dealing with the regulatory and compliance issues affecting companies. Certainly the backlash of greenwashing is hurting companies. And they got away with greenwashing because they could. They didn't have necessarily tools like Root to let them show the data, show us what you're doing, and let us track it, not just from yourself, but through the chain. That's really important, that we have technology and tools to tackle greenwashing as well. And yeah, I mean, perhaps a more pressing issue probably it affects many of the people who are here with us today, is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. So basically, this is going to require carbon accountability on an international scale. It's going to make it really difficult for a lot of companies who are large emitters of carbon who want to do business in Europe, because those carbon costs are going to get added. And this is simultaneously terrifying, but it's also very exciting that we're going to start to have a more level playing field, where companies who are doing the work to design carbon out of their products will become more cost competitive. And that's exactly what we need to happen. That's what Root does. It enables companies to become more competitive, especially with compliance coming, with CBAM coming. CSRD is already here. So it's an exciting time. What we do need is standardization of reporting. I think everyone knows it's really hard to stay compliant when it's not clear and when it's fragmented. So having standard ways of measuring is really important. But we're getting there. We're absolutely getting there.
Completely agree. I feel like the past couple of years has been this huge wave of regulations, and every week a new one pops up. So it's a really exciting time, but it's also a really exciting time personally to be working for a life cycle assessment company, which can really help companies become compliant and become more cost effective and more efficient, like you said, Guy. So my last question before we go into Q&A is, I appreciate a lot of people on this call probably work for companies right now. So Guy, do you have any practical tips on how companies can use the circular economy to reduce their Scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, I mean, definitely getting your hands on data that affects your company and your operations. That's the starting point. You can't manage what you don't measure. So I think we're all working with Root. that's a great starting point to understand what you can do. And with that data, with those insights, you can start to design circularity into your products. That's really where we have the biggest opportunity to make products that are linear and wasteful and toxic, to redesign them in a way that makes your company more cost-effective, more competitive, and more integrated as well, more interconnected with your supply chain partners. It's really a critical time right now with the way that global supply chains are being made a bit more local, a bit more resilient, a bit more adaptable. Now is the time to really be investing in building up your chain with your supply chain partners and getting them on board. And the common language that we all share is data. So I think that's a really the most practical thing you can do, is start engaging with your supply chain partners and working on tackling this topic together. There are many ways to do this, but of course, it's what are the opportunities? How do we make products and the suppliers connected to that have a better business case as a result of doing this work? That's what we all want, but then you need to invest in that. That's what we're working on, which is chain funding. How do we invest in supply chains, in the supply chain partners, to incentivize them to invest in changing their way of working? That's what I think is coming next. We're developing the language, we're developing the metrics. We're all on the same. We're working towards the same goal. But what we're going to need next is financing that can, like letting banks invest in companies and their supply chain partners to bring these circular products to market and get those investments back in so that they can do it again and again and again until we finally have a circular and regenerative economy.
It's a brilliant way to finish up, a very inspirational vision of the future of what we need. Completely agree, Guy. We need financing and we need collaboration to really scale all of these brilliant circularity initiatives. Great. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation. I'm just now going to move to the audience Q&A. Just if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now. I can see that's yeah, Cynthia, why don't you go first? Great.
My question is more from one of my most recent experiences while I was in school. We had this 3-month project with a healthcare company that specializes in mostly distribution of laparoscopic medical instruments. So those instruments that are used for non-invasive surgeries. But according to the circular economy model they were ahead of policy. So they already had partners who were trying to specialize in reprocessing, and European regulations haven't yet caught up to that. So there was this, creative tension between one of them, facing a lot of losses and they had to shut down, and the, passion for wanting to get this done very quickly. And we couldn't quite help because what do you do? So I was wondering, for Guy, what's your what would be a practical solution for such a company who seems way ahead of regulation on their circular economy journey? And then for Charlie, I think my question would be, how do you think Root would be able to, maybe in a stepwise manner, help such a company transition on their journey without having to be so frustrated about what's missing?
Yeah, so maybe Cynthia, thank you so much for your question. And woo, that's not a simple one. Policy is the great enabler, and it can be the great blocker as well from innovation coming from companies. One of the lessons that we've learned is that policymakers really value talking to entrepreneurs and understanding what their needs are so that they can write better policy. They're basically just operating in a different time scale and a different kind of horizon. Business owners are kind of fighting to grow and survive and build their company. Policymakers are often thinking years, decades ahead, and they sometimes miss the urgency coming from the private sector, the entrepreneurs. So we get them together. We get policymakers, circular policymakers, and entrepreneurs to come together once a year, drink a coffee together, and the policymakers are so keen to learn from the entrepreneurs to improve their policy. So my advice would be find the policymakers that are affecting the medical instruments company that you mentioned, and set up a call with them to understand their perspective. We can always learn a lot from each other, but it's really important to keep that conversation alive as time goes by for better policy.
Definitely. And just to build on that, I feel like a real common theme of this webinar has been data. Data is what influences decisions, and that is exactly what a policymaker would need, is data on this situation so it can inform their policies. So Cynthia, you ask of how would Root hypothetically support and really help with this situation? What Root would be able to do is, if you worked with a company, an automated LCA company like Root, we could provide the data and you could use that data when in those conversations with those policymakers to really help them understand the picture, understand the situation, and really help adjust or to create new policy which really accounts for this situation which your company that you had has encountered.
All right, thank you. That's very helpful.
Great. I can see there's a question in the chat from Herman. This is more relevant to me because it's around LCA. So you need an LCA database. No database comes to mind, which is free, unfortunately. However, I can speak to my co-founder, Hais, who's the LCA expert, and I can ask if he's aware of any free databases that you can use for your research, Herman. And I have your email, so I'll send you a follow-up email after this call from just saying what my co-founder said about if there's any free databases you can use. Great. Kazim?
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Charlie. I'm a business data analyst, and recently I transitioned into sustainability consulting. Yes, through the 1.5 Academy, where I was trained to be a sustainability consultant. Now, during my training, we did scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission calculation. And the tools we use up to today still stuck to my brain, like the 2030 calculator and the B evaluation tool. B in short scope, business evaluation emission tool. These are the two tools we use during the training. And what I'm trying to say is that since with this CBAM law in the Europe now, there will be need for a lot of sustainability consultants or carbon analysts, as another people call it. Now, if these people are employed, what they would recommend to the company is the tool they are familiar with. And what I'm familiar with now is 2030 calculator and the business evaluation emission tool. Wouldn't it be better for Roots to create maybe an internship or something to make the tool more widely used, more popular among sustainability consultants, so that in case a company asks for their recommendation, they can recommend Roots as a tool? Thank you.
It's a brilliant question, and it's something which we're definitely looking into right now. So one part of my role is that I'm the partnership lead at Root, which means that I'm helping build the connection between Root and consultancies, so stuff like carbon analysts and carbon consultants, like you said. So Root does perform company-wide and company-wide carbon footprints and product-level carbon footprints for entire product portfolios. So we are partnered. We currently are partnered with several consultancies to really support their carbon teams, to provide the data that the carbon teams need to support their clients on setting and implementing net zero targets. Kazim, did that answer your question?
Nope. Nope. My question is, what is Roots doing to make the tool, as in Roots as a service, as a tool, as a emission calculation tool, more popular among business sustainability consultants? And my own opinion is, for the tool to be more popular among young consultants like me, if there's like a collaboration, like a free internship between Roots and consultant, maybe 3 months, 1 month, from all over the world, for consultants all over the world. When we leave, we can recommend your tool to businesses that, oh, there was a time I was interning with Root and we use this tool and it's very good. I can recommend it for a company in the near future. So what is the collaboration between Root and young sustainability consultants like I in form of internship? Thank you.
Maybe I can make a comment on a potential opportunity here, Kazim. What I'm hearing is, how can we incentivize sustainability consultants to use Root, or make it a standard tool that's very normal and very common to use? What we're seeing happening in the world of circular supply chains is sustainability consultants playing the role of what's called a chain coordinator. And a chain coordinator is a neutral third party who works with different supply chain partners. Often this is an international collaboration as well. Like, supply chains always flow across borders and continents most of the time. And this chain coordinator aggregates the data from the different supply chain partners, and they help to align the incentives for why they should work towards, in our case, a chain agreement. It's just a signed contract to agree on who does what, who earns how much. We're seeing a lot of sustainability consultants start to have the opportunity to step into the role of chain coordination because they have industry know-how, they speak the language, they can bring the chain partners together, and working with Root as a technology partner, you can essentially position yourself as the spider in the web of all of these chains. As an additional benefit, chain funding can be used to hire chain coordinators to oversee these projects and manage them, supervise them, make sure the agreement gets delivered over years, because these projects often last for many years. So yeah, I mean, I think it's good to discuss it with your colleagues who are also sustainability consultants. Like, how can you position yourself as an expert in certain sectors with knowledge, with contacts? Knowing Root is already a great start. And yeah, just make it a common tool that you use amongst each other.
Thank you.
I think it's a brilliant idea. And yeah, as mentioned, we do work with consultants, but they're usually for the larger consultancies. So it's definitely a really good thing to highlight. Kazim, I'll definitely speak to my colleagues about how we can engage with, like you said, kind of the young consultants, the people working, like freelancers, for example, how we can engage with them too. So thanks for the suggestion. I'll definitely bring that back to the team.
Thank you to Chad.
And sorry, Kazim, if you want to learn more about this topic, you could, there's a book called Sustainable Supply Chain Coordination, written by Deborah Dull. She founded the Circular Supply Chain Network, which is very active on this topic. And the main insight is that a lot of us already know what we need to do to make our products and our supply chains more sustainable. The hard bit is coordinating everyone together. That's really the hard bit. And that's where we need people like yourself as a consultant to play this really important coordination role. So yeah, just maybe something in there for you.
Thank you, Guy.
Great. Does anybody have any other questions?
What about Gijs's AI note taker? Does the AI agent have any questions?
Just in the background recording.
When it talks back, then I'm scared.
Yeah, 100%.
Or maybe a business challenge that you have. If you don't have a question directly linked to this webinar topic, it's also nice just to hear what challenges you're experiencing that are connected to life cycle assessments, scope 3 emissions, circularity, strategy, stuff like that. Now's an opportunity to explore that together. Looks like we got all the data that we need. Questions about the Root sustainability product? Maybe something that you've noticed, you've experienced, and how we can get more people using automated LCAs. Well, we could always revisit Cynthia's original question about the microscopic instruments. Cynthia, do you want to give us a bit more context about the particular policy that you were referencing affecting healthcare?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's the reprocessing of medical devices. Reprocessing is basically taking certain elements from medical devices and being able to retreat them like you were making a new one, but not necessarily a new one. But
Yeah.
it's disinfecting and getting back to that, new state without having to mine out new materials and make them from scratch, basically. So far, what the company has been able to do is focus on reposable instruments, which is the parts of those medical devices that don't go into the person's or an individual, like during surgery, those parts that are outside of the person's body, they can detach them and then, fix them with new parts, which is clearly a nice circular model, but it's not enough because the metals and everything else that actually goes in are the things that cause the environmental damage from mining and all of that. So they considered reprocessing, which was then taking what has been used, all of it, taking it through the sterilization process and then working its way back into the medical chain. The reason why policy is behind is because of the fear of cross-contamination. You can't guarantee that everyone will do what they're supposed to do to make sure that a reprocessed device is, passes through every checkbox. But ultimately, they were already ahead with research and partners who were already working on tools that were being reprocessed from, because they work with a chain of 50 hospitals in Germany. But unfortunately, because of the lag in policy catch-up, they had to shut down that operation. So before they had to shut down, they were struggling with what do we do now, in the meantime, because they had partners in the US, in the UK, and a bunch of other supply chain partners who were dependent on that technology coming through so that they could cut down because they had made promises with, how secular by 2050 and all of those things. And this was the big problem. Well, the company did shut down because we couldn't find a solution to your head of policy. We don't know what you're supposed to do now. So that particular arm of the company had to shut down, even though there was research backing how much it would save and how much it would save hospitals, and how much it would save the government who have to fund hospitals and all of that. But
yeah, it's quite a situation. I mean, I've heard about the insanity of policy in healthcare, where some medical instruments, they have an expiration date after 5 years.
Exactly.
And they have to be thrown in the bin after 5 years. You have these perfectly good medical instruments that are so valuable, so needed, but because of regulation, in the bin. I do believe that there are companies who are trying to solve this problem. by bringing them back into the chain in other ways. But often there's policy blocking this. So yeah, it's one of those thorny problems to get around. But yeah, I imagine it's hard with the bits that go into bodies. You do not want cross-contamination for sure. But I imagine as sterilization technology gets better and as remanufacturing gets better, as reverse logistics gets better of collecting used medical waste, this will probably be an opportunity for entrepreneurs to get medical waste that without any risk of cross-sterilization and keeping it back. And from my understanding, there are huge opportunities in healthcare for this. So it's great that you're already working on this topic and trying to find solutions.
Yeah, sure. But I was wondering, Charlie, would it be a good idea if I could run it by them if they were willing to talk with Root, on a possible solution to their current state, which is they can't do reprocessing, but they are still on the path to circularity. So I could.
Yeah, 100% definitely. As mentioned before, so if you speak to the company and they're interested in speaking to Root, on our website, you can book in a call with Heis, the co-founder, and he can kind of really deep dive into the exact challenge that they're having and how Root can support them with it.
Okay. And then, Guy, you mentioned something about some kind of policymakers business sit down that is kind of hosted by Circular Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a tradition that we do, and it's really well received. And I imagine it could work in other cities, other ecosystems as well. We call it the golden coffee. In Dutch, it's the gouden koffie. And it's basically the idea that entrepreneurs, when they approach government and policymakers, they have to drink a coffee with a policymaker, but it's not the right policymaker. They need to speak with this person. They drink a second coffee. That
Cool.
says, actually, I know exactly who you need to talk to. You need to talk to this policymaker. They drink the golden coffee, and that's the one where the change that needs to get changed happens. And we want to fast track the golden coffee by just getting them all in the same room physically, both the entrepreneurs and the policymakers, and we just drink coffee. We do have a bit of a format that we're developing around it, but for example, if you were to think of like the healthcare sector, if we use Nigeria, I'm not sure if you're based in Lagos, but like how can we get the circular entrepreneurs and ecosystem around healthcare to come together with the policymakers that are affecting them. And magical things happen when people are just sitting down in a casual. We try to deliberately keep it quite casual and informal because it's just listening to each other. It's a conversation, it's a dialogue. And a lot of those insights come to the surface. And sometimes the policymakers know about a whole lot of support programs, opportunities, people who can be the golden coffee for the particular entrepreneurs. So yeah, they're open. These policymakers seem like they're in an ivory tower, but you can quite often find them and reach out to them and have a conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you.
This golden coffee sounds like a brilliant idea, Guy. For like half the battle of sustainability is just getting the right people in the same room together. So it sounds fantastic.
And bonus points if you can get a few people who are looking to finance these propositions as well, because it's great if the policy gets changed or if you know what needs to be done to deal with that. But also if we have like the ecosystem partners, the players, the people who can enable more circular businesses, such as financiers. Banks are also very curious to look at playing a role in the transition of supply chains to a more circular model. They know that the business case is solid and that regulation is going to force it sooner or later, and that they can also earn interest from funding these collaborations. So the magic comes in getting together and tackling it one bottleneck at a time.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Just checking, does anybody else have any final questions?
No questions from my side.
Fantastic. Well, then let's wrap up. I just want to say again, thank you all so much for joining this webinar, and thanks, Guy, for joining as the guest speaker. I hope you enjoyed this session. There'll be a recording being sent out next week in case you want to re-listen to the webinar. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your days and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.